Hey, beloved, welcome back. Last week, I came on and talked about some personality tips for setting your intentions or choosing your word of the year or phrase of the year. So I thought it'd be fun to circle back, as promised, and talk about 5 practical ways you can actually focus on your word of the year or phrase of the year. Should be pretty fun, super factual, and some simple tips about how you can move forward. So if we haven't met yet, hi, my name is Courtney Louie. I'm the creator behind Coffee Chats and Yoga Mats, where we're all about helping you live intentionally with passion and purpose as God's beloved. Because personally, when you come from that perspective of you are God's beloved, you know whose you are, that helps you understand who you are, and then helps you create an aligned life. So I can fangirl about that for a long time, but we're going to get cracking. So if you haven't heard about what a word of the year is before, basically, it's not something you have to do. It's totally up to you. Some people set resolutions, some people set goals. I kind of like doing a blend of choosing a word or a phrase of the year to help me focus, make decisions throughout the year. I really be intentional about what I'm focusing my energy on. So for instance, in the past, I thought I'd do a few quick examples. Previously, in 2020, my husband and I chose to focus on being intentional and choosing peace because we're overachievers and it's hard not to just do one word. And it was really helpful because it actually along the way, we've really learned how to be more intentional with our time and energy. So for me, that involved like determining Coffee Chats and Yoga Mats focus. It involved actually setting spiritual pauses on a regular basis. We could talk about that more another time. Super empowering. It also involved, like, for me, creating a regular, more sustainable daily rhythms with an infant at home with me, or I guess an emerging toddler, I guess you could say. Also, it involved taking on weekly planning and monthly planning and doing an annual retreat. And I know that sounds like a lot of planning, but it was really, really helpful with getting organized and being more intentional about my time and energy. And the great thing was by doing that, that actually cleared up all kinds of headspace to focus more on being present and not being distracted by, when am I going to feed my family later today and things like that. So each year since then, we focus on different things. So the next year, I focus on dwelling in grace. And for me, that was really learning how to accept God's grace for me. Raise your hand if you struggle to embrace that. Offering grace to myself and also offering grace to others. Don't know about you, I can be very judgmental. And then last year, we focused on choosing courage. We had a lot of big changes going on in our family and in our own respective dynamics, and thought it would be a really valuable thing to focus on. And it was. So I can tell you all about that another time, but let's get cracking on those 5 practical ways you can actually focus on your word of the year throughout the year. Now, true confession, last year I focused on courage for about half the year, and then I totally forgot about it. So that happens. But a lot of that, like what we talked about with our last slide, is about setting intentions and doing your darndest, doing your best, and don't beat yourself up. So a few ways you can remind yourself about your word of the year or your focus or whatever your intention is. 1, super simple, post reminders of your word of the year wherever you are. So for you, that might be putting sticky notes on your desktop. It might be writing it on your journal. What I've been trained to do is when I journal each day is just write down the word. Very simple. It might involve writing it on your bathroom mirror. Erasable marker works really well. Using it as your phone background, setting it up as your computer or screen background. Maybe you put it at your dining room table, thinking about what are some places where it helps you remember it. And there's actually a really good program. I'll remember to pop the link in there from that the word of the year. They do a word of the year challenge. And one of the things they also encourage is actually creating a collage of all the different things, kind of like a vision board, of the things that remind you of that word of the year, what you want to focus on, and who you want to become. So pretty simple, not too complicated. So that first one, like I said, is posting reminders of your word of the year around you. Another option is 2. We're Bible-based here and focusing on being God's beloved. So number 2 is focusing on scripture that relates to your word of the year. And it depends on your word of the year. Maybe a little more tricky how to do it. I'm still trying to figure out for my word this year. But like Paul reminds us, it's important to be intentional in our thought life, where we direct our thoughts, which also affects how you spend your time and your energy. As he says in Philippians 4:8, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. And the great thing is the Bible is such a great resource. I'm not talking about text citing, just pulling out context. But I do encourage you, if, for instance, you want to choose joy more this year, or like in our instance, we chose courage, is look up verses in the Bible that highlight people who emulated that, when God speaks life into that, and then build that into your day. Something that's been helpful for my family is we've actually been trying to focus on one verse a month. I know it's like painfully easy, but we write it on a big whiteboard, and it's by our dining room table. And when we sit down to have supper together, we say the verse. Nothing super complicated, but that's been really helpful. So that might be something that for you could be really helpful, is front loading. If you're interested in focusing on fill in the blank for the year, look up a bunch of different verses that you can pull from. And that way, each week or each month, however you decide to do it, you can refer to that list and pull out that new verse to focus on. Because sometimes when you do the grunt work ahead of time, it can actually set yourself up for more success later on. Not complicated, but there we go. So, like we talked about, I just like recapping this over and over. 1, post reminders of your word of the year around you. That can also be pictures that inspire you. 2, focus on scripture that relates to your word of the year. 3, too many fingers, strategically seek out content that encourages you to dwell on that word. So, like again, I'll lean upon, I chose courage before. So a big thing that I really thought about throughout the coming year was, what are some books that encourage me to seek courage, to be brave, to be bold, and consciously try to read them. I'm kind of a nerd. I really miss school sometimes. And so for me, it was really helpful to actually plan on reading at least a book a month, or simmering in a book a month that focus on that concept, or pursue Bible studies that built me up in that way, exploring Joshua. It can also involve considering, what about podcasts? Are there any podcasts you like to listen to who, highlight, again, we're going with courage, but courage or bravery, or people moving out when they're afraid, and just being conscious about how can you seek out that kinds of content. So different sources you could look for: books, podcasts, movies, videos like YouTube, conferences, classes, social media channels, and so forth. And you don't have to constantly consume content, but it can be really helpful if you want to simmer in that idea, really, help yourself emulate it. It really affects what you pour into yourself. So be conscious of that. And again, that could be really helpful if you're choosing your word of the year. Just do brain dump. What are some different things that you're already interested in that would encourage you to focus on that? Or just remember that, oh yeah, I was going to be fill in the blank. So a few more examples of that, like reading a book a quarter this year that's related to your word of the year. And that could be fiction or nonfiction. Listening to one podcast episode a week that encourages you to focus on fill in the blank, or reminds you what it's like to walk out in joy or peace or whatever that is. When watching movies, just pay attention. Oh, they're really joyful. What is it that I really admire about them? Or what's stealing your joy? You don't have to go crazy analytical, but it can be a really good experience. Last one, attending a conference session this year. And there's a lot of free webinars and summits and all kinds of resources like that might speak to that word, that focus of who you want to emulate. So 4, incorporate your word of the year in your decision making. And this is when stuff really gets real, because how do you consciously choose your word of the year as you make decisions and encounter life? So I've kind of thought about, there's a few different ways. You've got stuff will happen, plus your word of the year. So like I shared, last year, we focused on courage, or at least we did most of the year. And a few things that we already knew what were happening was we were moving into a new neighborhood. So that meant, of course, settling into our new house, getting to know our neighbors. We were also getting involved in a different church campus that we'd been involved in before. Those are some known entities. So those are things that we knew it could be kind of scary, exciting, but scary at times. And so how can we be proactive about that? Maybe other things that you might have is knowing you're transitioning with your job. Maybe you're pursuing a big new project, or a new creative endeavor. Maybe you are adding a new person to your family, in whatever form that may be. You might be, for me also, I was trying to grow coffee chats and yoga mats where I can actually better serve and support people. And, the list goes on. So you've got the things that will happen, plus your word of the year. So how does that fit in? So, how can you put on that lens? You've also got the roles you play, plus your word of the year. So for instance, well, you're a human, congratulations. You may be a spouse, a parent, a coworker, a boss, a church volunteer, a leader. There's all these kinds of different roles, and thinking about what would it be like for me to live out fill in the blank in this role. So for instance, for me was actually starting to volunteer at church because I haven't done that in person in a long time. That's kind of scary, I admit, even if it's for like 3 to 7 year olds. And it was a really good experience, and it continues to be. But that was something that, like, you know what, I'm going to do the thing that still kind of intimidates me because I want to become a person who's not afraid of doing hard things, especially when I know they're good things. And then the last one I would kind of put into that is when life surprises you, plus your word of the year. And that's something you really can't forecast, right? But that's also just something to keep in mind, because life does happen that way. So in those instances where life goes awry, or you're like, wow, this is a new opportunity, how can I choose courage or joy or whatever that is? And then the fifth one, and I promise we'll recap them, celebrating your wins with your word of the year. And that's something I encourage you to do regularly, not just the one time at the end of the year when like, oh yeah, what was my word? So that might be like journaling your wins each day. Big fan of that. We could talk about that another time. Taking time for a monthly reflection or an end of the week reflection, which really doesn't have to be that complicated. It could just be dumping. What are some of your highlights? Some things that you're really thankful for, that made you proud, what those things might be. Could just be doing a happy dance. Bring it on. Photos, memorializing when you did that, when, let's say you chose courage and you learned how to make sushi. And that may seem really simple, but that could be really daunting for you. So taking a photo, celebrating. And of course, sharing the good news, especially with people who, got your back and really care about your passion and your success. And ideally, you can encourage them to, move forward in those brave, bold ways. So I know those are quite a few different things to keep in mind. A quick recap. So there's 5 different ways you can practically focus on your word of the year. In theory, it's cool, but what do you do about it? So 1, you can post reminders of the word of your word of the year around you. So post it all around. You can focus on scripture that relates to your word of the year. You can 3, strategically seek out content that encourages you to focus on it or be reminded of your word of the year. Movies, books, podcasts, Bible plans, summits, conferences, classes, all kinds of different things. 4, incorporate it into your decision making. 5, celebrate your wins with your word of the year. And then I do want to pop back up real briefly because there's another thing. What if your word of the year falls flat? What if you do like I did and you focus on it, you remember it, you keep it in mind for like 6 months, and then you forget about it? That's okay. Imperfect progress for the win. Really, a lot of it boils down to what was the purpose behind the word of the year? Was it to help you grow, to become more of who you believe God designed you to be? Was it to push you to take care of yourself or take risks or, whatever those things were? Did you actually make progress in that way? And if you didn't focus on it all year, that's okay. But did you grow? Did you learn from it? Was it empowering? Imperfect progress for the win. And so a few things to keep in mind are definitely give yourself a pat on the back. Grab your favorite thought recording tool, your pen, your voice recorder, your keyboard, whatever you like to use. And I encourage you, take a little time to reflect. It doesn't have to be super complicated, but thinking about this as if you're doing it on behalf of one of your very favorite people. And would you treat them with kindness, or would you bludgeon them for not measuring up? I'm assuming likely you treat them with kindness. And I'd encourage you to ask yourself these questions. I got 4 for you. 1, what was your word of the year or phrase of the year? 2, what were some ways I consciously chose to live out this word? Okay, you consciously thought about it. 3, if I forgot about my focus statement, that's okay. I'm human. What are some ways I lived it out even when I forgot about it? Because you probably might be surprised about how often you actually lived it out. And then 4, what are 1 to 3 or more, you could always have more, things that you are proud of from this year? And it doesn't have to be directly tied to your word of the year or your focus of the year, whatever that is. But it might be really empowering to think about like, you know what, I've made growth. I have made progress. Even if I've had to take a few steps back, I'm coming back forward. So that is 5 practical ways you can actually focus on your word of the year. I actually have a full post about this, and I can pop that in the comments so you can check it out if you want to learn more. And I'll try and remember to pop in the word of the year resource I told you about. But feel free to comment below if you have a word of the year you're focusing on, and if you've got any questions. I will be back soon, probably tomorrow, because doors are opening soon for your Authentic Attention Live. It's got a pretty exciting program. I'll tell you a little bit about it, and I look forward to seeing you again. So in the meantime, as always, you can live intentionally with passion and purpose as God's beloved. Bye.